Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be focusing on some poetry terms to know for this lesson. All these terms are used in the poetry that you're going to be reading this lesson, however they're not necessarily only used in poetry, they're used in other types of literature as well. So let's get going. The first term to know is theme. Hopefully, I'm assuming all of you understand what theme is. We've dealt with it in this course before. Theme, as you remember, is the message about the human condition that the author would like the reader to understand after reading that text. When you're done reading a text, you can ask yourself these two questions. What was the topic of the poem? And what would the author like you to learn about that topic? That usually gets you to the theme. The next section of terms I want to look at is figurative language. Figurative language is any sort of language that has some other sort of meaning that is above and beyond itself. The first type of figurative language I want to talk about is symbols. So, for example, if I drew this symbol here, most of you would know that that symbol is for peace. But words can be symbols too, things can be symbols. So while you're reading, think if everything that you're reading about is really actually referring to that item or that person, or if that item or person can stand for something bigger than themselves. The second term, which you've also dealt with before in the past, is personification. You look at the root word here, person. Personification is when you turn something that isn't a person into something that has the qualities of a person. For example, if you say your dog is smiling, that's personification. There's some pretty funny commercials about like Swiffer, where they're the floor cleaners and they fall in love with each other. That's personification. The Geico commercials with the gecko or the Aflac commercials with the duck. That's all personification. The other type of figurative language here is apostrophe. Don't get it confused with like the apostrophe like Karen, super cool, like that apostrophe. Apostrophe in this aspect is when a speaker of a poem or a narrator addresses a real person outside of the person reading the text. It could be a real person or an imaginary person. A lot of times this happens when people in poetry, when the speaker in poetry addresses like a deity like God or Jesus, or a famous person. That's what apostrophe is. The next few things to think about, the first one is rhythm here. Rhythm is just the beat of the poem, and the beat of the poem is created by the emphasis that you put on the words. So one type of rhythm that actually Shakespeare used a lot was iambic pentameter. Now, what's iambic pentameter? If you look, an iamb is two syllables put together, and pentameter, penta means 5. So 5 times 5 times 2, that's 10. So here I have an example of iambic pentameter. Now, if we were to count the syllables, we'd want to get to 10. What light through yonder window breaks? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, I got to put another line in there, but apparently I forgot Shakespeare at the moment, but we'll get the point. So we have those lines, and if you look, the iamb, the two, we have these two together. What light through yonder window breaks. Okay, we got those together. Now what you got to think about is that there's rhythm in that. What light through yonder window breaks. You could clap along to that, and if you keep going over and over and over, you'd be able to clap and tap your foot to that. Now, poets do that a lot of the time because it sounds more like music, more like a song. The other thing that poetry can have that makes it sound more like a song is a refrain. Now the refrain is the part of a song, I'm going to use songs as an example, that you would remember. If you never remember the verses of a song exactly, you can only sing along with the refrain, the part that's repeated over and over again. A lot of times poetry can have that as well, which makes poems seem more like music. The second to last thing to think about here is tone, the tone of the poem. And the tone is the speaker's attitude through the word choice. What is the topic of that poem? Think about that first. What does the speaker think about the topic of that poem? What kinds of words are they using to describe that topic? Tone, in real simple terms, can be positive, neutral, or negative. In more complicated terms, you can have a lot of different adjectives to describe tone, such as bitter or joyous, but that's what you want to focus on. What is the speaker's attitude towards the topic of that poem? Lastly, I want you to think about the term psychological realism. Now, psychological realism isn't necessarily something in a poem. It's a genre of poems, a group of poems, where psychological realism. And in this second half of this lesson, you'll be reading some of that. Now, what was psychological realism? Well, realism wants you to show it like it is, right? Show it real. And psychological, psycho in your brain. So psychological realism has to do with the speaker's real internal motivations and internal conflicts. In psychological realism, in that kind of poetry, you're really into the speaker's head at all times. So, that is what we want you to be focusing on in this lesson. If at any time in the lesson you're confused, feel free to ask your teacher. That's what we're here for, and to come back to this video to get a little more clarification and remember.